Thank you, Mr. President. As requested, I would like to brief the Security Council on ongoing developments in the Islamic Republic of Iran under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East. As this is the first public meeting of the Security Council in 2018, I would like, on behalf of the Department of Political Affairs, to congratulate the 6 new elected members of the Council on the assumption of their important responsibilities. I also wish the Security Council a successful year. Mr. President, the protests in the Islamic Republic of Iran started on 28 December 2017, when hundreds of Iranians gathered in a largely peaceful manner in Mashhad, the country's second largest city, chanting slogans against economic hardship. Over the following days, protests occurred in other cities, other urban areas, including Tehran, as well as in many rural areas. Some of the slogans also expressed disappointment at slow or limited change in social strictures and political freedoms, and criticized what the demonstrators decried as the privileged position of the clergy and elements of the country's security establishment. In other cases, demonstrators demanded that Iran cease costly involvement in the region. As the protests escalated, some turned violent. Videos posted on social media platforms, several of which remain largely blocked by the government, and footage broadcast by state TV channels showed the beating of protesters, as well as the burning of government offices, banks, and religious centers. According to reports carried by official Iranian media, more than 20 Iranians, including a teenage boy and a policeman, have died during the protests. Iran's Ministry of Interior stated that over 1,000 protesters have been detained, although many may have since been released. With very limited presence on the ground, the Secretariat cannot confirm or deny the authenticity of the images that have been broadcast or the extent of the violence. However, we have received reports that the police, rather than the military forces, were responding to the protests. On the 3rd of January, Iran's Revolutionary Guards announced the end of anti-government protests. Recent reports indicate smaller and scattered demonstrations. Meanwhile, from the 3rd to the 5th of January, large pro-government rallies were reportedly held across the country, with participants expressing support for the supreme leader and condemning violence. Mr. President, members of the Security Council, on the 31st of December 2017, President Rouhani told a cabinet meeting that the Iranian people should be allowed space to protest and criticize their government. At the same time, he stressed that violence will not be tolerated. 2 days later, on the 2nd of January, the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei accused Iran's enemies, without naming them, of stirring the unrest. On the 3rd of January, the permanent representative of Iran to the United Nations wrote to the Secretary General accusing the United States of stepping up, and I quote, its acts of intervention in a grotesque way in Iran's internal affairs under the pretext of providing support for sporadic protests in Iran. End of quote. Mr. President, the outbreak of violence, of protests in Iran has focused the attention to events in the country. A number of world leaders have expressed support for the Iranian protesters. Others including the European Union, have called on the Iranian authorities to respect the right to peaceful demonstration and freedom of opinion. Yet, more have supported the government of Iran, calling the protests an internal matter. On the 3rd of January, the Secretary General issued a statement deploring the loss of life in the protests and urging respect for the right to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, and that demonstrations take place in a peaceful manner. The same day, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights called on the Iranian authorities, and I quote, to handle the wave of protests that have taken place around the country with great care so as not to further inflame violence and unrest, and to investigate all deaths and serious injuries that have occurred so far, end of quote. On the 5th of January, 4 United Nations Special Rapporteurs stated that, and I quote, the Iranian authorities should take immediate action to ensure that all citizens can exercise peacefully the right to freedom of expression and assembly, and should ensure that these and other fundamental rights are not met with violence, end of quote. Mr. President, members of the Council, as of today, United Nations development work in the Islamic Republic of Iran has not been significantly affected by the recent events. The Secretariat will continue to monitor developments on the ground and engage Iranian authorities with a view to contributing to efforts that address, as the Secretary General underscored in his statement on 3rd of January, the legitimate concerns of the population through peaceful means, and help to avoid violence or retribution against peaceful protesters. I thank you, Mr. President.